Welcome, another episode, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insight, sitting here with Dave Sliepka. We're going to do a tribute to Alan Rosen, Mr. Mint, a larger-than-life figure that Dave and I both knew, and we'll have a little back and forth about positive reminiscence of an amazing guy who passed away about 3 years ago. But first, thanks to our sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, comc.com, that's comc.com out in the Seattle area, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggins and Scott Auctions, Upper Deck, Panini, and Topps. So, welcome, Dave. We've chatted before. We've worked together. Actually, you've worked for Beckett Publications and Beckett Media how many times? Is this your third stint? Are you 3.0?
No,
or you
just two.
Or you had two? I thought you were there, you were gone, you were back. Thought you were gone, then you were back.
No, I only came back once to be the editor of the baseball magazine for a couple of years.
Well, you've seen...
My first stint was 22 years, so that's enough.
Well, mine was about 21 years. So that's good. Any rate, always great talking to you. And we each had a relationship with Alan Rosen, but it was from a slightly different angle, each of us, I think. And so I think perhaps as we've not scripted this, but realized that you have some of the other half of the story in some cases in the interactions that I had and our company had with Mr. Mint. So get us started.
That's true. Being that I was working in the advertising department for much of my career at Beckett, he was a whale. He was a target. So he was somebody that I wanted to know. So that was later on. Early on, I for people that don't know Alan or weren't around when he entered the business, he was to the hobby what Donald Trump has been to politics. And that just came to me on the way over here. I was thinking about it as how do you explain Alan Rosen's impact in this hobby? And really, he entered our business the way that Trump entered politics, is that he did not come in to be like anybody else. He came in to be like himself.
Yep.
He wanted to change the status quo. He wanted to make things better the way that he thought they were. And
he took this industry to another level. And so his rising tide really raised all boats. It's like you say about President Trump. I mean, basically, there's more interest in politics now because half the people hate somebody and half of them love him. Half love his policies, half hate his policies. With Mr. Mint, Alan Rosen, I think more than half the people appreciated him.
But it was very similar, where there was a faction that really thought that he was just a blowhard, big mouth.
Well, no, but he did have a big mouth, but he also produced.
He did.
He took on all comers when it was time to buy. He would, again, if it was an eligible buy, he wanted it, but he had some favorites. He had some middle people that were finding deals for him and that he wholesaled out stuff to. Now, those people, he was the golden goose for them. If you were on the outside looking in and you had to buy retail after it went down, well, then maybe you're thinking, hey, Alan, cut me in on this big find.
And the bottom line is he had access to the cash. A lot of times people would have a deal that they couldn't touch.
And they'd bring him in and then he somehow had a way of making sure that it wasn't a pyramid thing, but in this multi-level situation, he wanted to be at the top of the pyramid to where he brokered he was in charge, the general partner. Exactly. And then he'd have his publication guy, he'd have his autograph guy, he'd have his vintage guy and all that stuff. And then he had some sense. And it has been the case that when it's a huge collection like that, it sells at a discount because there are not that many people who can put together 6-figure or now 7-figure types of cash. And he was the first one to do that.
He was also one of the first ones to appear on national television, national radio, famously for Good Morning America, and articles about him in Sports Illustrated. And people would be jealous of him. Other dealers would be jealous, but at the same, like as you said, the high tide raises all boats, is that he brought awareness to the business, and the business only grew as he grew.
Well, I mean, he was social media before there was social media. He was, I wouldn't say he was photogenic, but he certainly put his picture on everything. And so he's always out there. And if again, this is an audio podcast. We can't show all those. But in the audio aspect of just the written word and the spoken word, he was out there talking it up as well. So he was not a shrinking violet, but he understood the power of image and presentation with his fistful of $100 bills. And and all that stuff. So he was made for Instagram. He was made for Twitter. He was made for Facebook. Before they were around, he did the equivalent by being omnipresent at the key shows, it seemed like to me.
And he was the key element at any show. If he was at your show, it was a legit show. Or he put
it on the map.
He made it a legit show. He was the first guy.
Well, he could get free table. He could also be right up front, where if back in the days when people would walk in with a collection, he'd have first shot.
He'd have first shot. He was one of the first guys to have a display case and just have $100 bills fanned out. Yeah. And then by the end of the show, he'd have Mantle rookies fanned out. And you wanted to see what was going on. I mean, there would people be sometimes just hang out at his table just to watch, just to see the things that were coming in. And
in his years back in would you say his heyday was in the late 80s, the 90s, somewhere in there, probably?
Definitely late 80s.
Late 80s, for sure.
Not that he was any less of an impact in the early 90s.
But that was...
that was the strength.
And basically, he did... if he did like $10 million in those days, what would the equivalent be now?
Wow.
$100 million?
It would have to be, because there was a time when a $10 million auction, when a whole auction catalog, that
was a year's worth of an auction. Right. And it was 600 pages of primo stuff. And so, so at his peak, so let's say he wasn't doing 100 million, but he was doing 10 million. That's no eBay. That's just face to face or making a phone call or transacting at shows.
And his ads through SCD.
And the ads through SCD, where he was.
In some ways, he made SCD. In some ways, SCD helped make him. He had the dominant position of the inside cover or first page of every issue. He demanded that, just as he demanded the first table in the show. Right. I mean, he wouldn't participate unless he had what he wanted.
Well, he was an important, let's get into the price guide aspect, because he was an important source for those price guides because he was doing so much business. Now, but the question would be, is the transaction to be reported when I'm sitting there and you're sitting there, we're trying to do accurate price guides. Is it his buy price? Or is it his sell price that he sold to his middle people? Or is it the retail price that they sold it for or tried to sell it for? Again, we're trying to do a retail price guide, but I'd get into it with him about that. I'd say, but Al, you sold it for this. He said, yeah, but it's really worth this. I said, well, then how come you'd be able to buy it all day long at this? And at some point, we went from him being a strong contributor to him kind of getting mad at me. He'd always faithfully mark up the books, and then all of a sudden he went on strike. I don't think he was asking for a better deal. We had some misunderstanding that he was pretty much unwilling to talk about with me. I mean, I'm a different personality. I certainly respected him, but he got frustrated about something. So enlighten me on that. We've talked about that a little bit, but,
when that started to go south, I was working on the price guide team, and I remember that, and that was he really became a persona non grata for Beckett employees. That we would travel shows and all the time, and we would be cordial, but he would not.
He'd be nasty sometimes.
And sometimes not cordial to some of our employees. But it was just he was very intimidating, and we didn't understand fully what the reason was, but we just knew that stay away. We weren't going to get anything. So skip ahead a few years later when I moved over to advertising, and that's where I said that I decided to make the call. I said he hadn't been advertising in
he wouldn't talk to me. Correct. So I'm glad, because I think he was mad at me, not our team.
Right. And I think I got him on the phone, and he says, no, I'm with SCD and I'd never be with you guys again. Yeah. And I don't know if it ended with a click right there, or if it didn't go much longer, but at least he knew who I was. And, I was then I'd see him at a show and I'd say hello. So it was kind of just trying to develop a relationship. And as I did that, I just kept, there would be special issues, or there'd be sponsorships, or there'd be opportunities, things that we were doing that legitimately could be a good fit for him. And I wanted to feed his ego, not just for the sake of it, but it was a good fit, and it would have been a good fit for him. It would have been a good fit for us. And that's what I always looked for as an ad rep. Yeah. And, I think he respected that in some way. So skip ahead to
Dave, you're kind of exceptional in the fact that you had totally paid your dues. You'd been this amazing ad guy, but you also had the price guide analytic chops too. So you clearly could speak his languages, which is Correct. Selling cards and advertising.
Right. It wasn't just, trying to, hey, you want it for 1,000? How about 800? How about 700? It was about the fit, and it was about the opportunity.
He wouldn't have done it for free at some point there.
I believe that those words were spoken. Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, I believe he did say that. Yeah. Because I wouldn't take it. That was in the beginning.
Right.
but as time went by and I began to, whittle them down a little bit, the time came where I had the opportunity to have dinner with them at a trade conference.
You're not talking about weeks. You're not talking about months. I think you're talking about years.
Yes. Had an opportunity to have a dinner with them at the Hawaii Trade Conference.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had ever heard from you, or I don't think I'd ever heard from anybody. What is the real reason that
I didn't know what
Jim
it was,
and Al
Dave.
are,
I didn't know what it was.
Are don't get along. I didn't know. And I just sat down and I just said, do you mind me just asking, what is your problem with Jim? His answer wasn't quick. He took a deep breath and he said, I think he might have used the word respect, and he felt like that you weren't listening to his contributions, is that he was giving contributions, but they weren't being listened to. And he said he understood him from some aspect, but other aspects where he had absolute 100% proof and you still didn't accept it, that's when he couldn't have it. And I said, well, give me an example. Like, what was that about? He said, well, I got images of a 1950 blank, I can't remember specifically, uncut sheets where it definitively shows that this X card is a short print. And it has to be. And he still doesn't acknowledge that in the magazine. And that is something that I just can't get past. Does he have a library full of them? Is he holding back on them? Is he trying to manipulate? Why will he refuse to acknowledge that? And I obviously had no comeback. I had no knowledge. I didn't know what that was about. So we moved on to the next subject, continued to talk, did what we could. Long story short, he eventually did run a few ads with us later on, but that's not the point of the story. So I was able to get back with you, Jim, I think after, maybe even right there in Hawaii, or maybe when we got back to the office, and I relayed the story to you, and your response was so very quick. It was, yeah, but I have the pictures of the other sheets that he doesn't have. And I said, what? Because the way Al told the story, I almost believed him. He made it sound like, well, yeah, Jim's wrong. This has got to be wrong. And I said, Jim, what's the story with this? And you said, yeah, those are those three sheets. And then on the other three sheets, they all balance out. Yeah. And I was just thinking, wow. I mean, there you go.
Well, listeners, it's tough. There's like I say, partial knowledge. We're all iterating toward it. Sometimes people don't have the whole picture, but I mean, I lost a number of years of friendship with him. I didn't lose a lot of sleep about it because I was probably not sleeping that much anyway those days. But the respect issue, I want to get back to that before we stop here, is that I did respect him, but where I drew the line was that he at some point felt that he was the market. And I wasn't, and that's the other aspect that you haven't said, that I was not willing to say, Al, you are the 100% market maker. And since we're trying to track the market and you're the market maker, then whatever you say goes. I was not willing to do that. And that's when we had our little standoff. And the uncut sheets, of which, I've been studying that stuff more than he had, but I don't, it's just one of those things. It's a shame. He died of leukemia about 3 years ago, I think. And like I say, at one point, we were pretty good friends, and then we weren't. But I basically have really good memories of back in his prime, where he was just hitting it out of the park every show, and bragging about it, and then doing it all over again. And I want to thank you, Dave, for being here and taking us down memory lane with just, again, the positive aspects of a guy that really was a real giant and really helped build this industry. And he is missed. I know he slowed down in his later years, but in his prime, he was absolutely a force.
We are here in some aspects because of him, yes. And we're in a better place because this industry had him.
Absolutely. Definitely worth a tribute. Alan Rosen, you're missed, and thank you for this opportunity. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode, and thank you, listeners.